This happened in the summer, and I believe I was about 12 at the time. I was staying in a hotel in a fairly large city with my mom and my younger brother. We were visiting other extended family, but chose not to stay in their house. My brother is younger than me by a decent amount, so I was usually told to keep an eye on him. On the day we arrived, my mom told me to do just that while she checked us in and received our room card. So, my brother and I sat down on a couch in the lobby and relaxed a little bit. While we were sitting, a man in about his mid-40s walked into the hotel. The couch was facing the hotel doors, so I got a good look at him. I remember that he was very average looking. Describing his features in detail could generate several different images. The guy comes in and sits on the couch opposite ours. I didn't think anything of it until I realized that he didn't go up to the counter first. He just came in and sat down. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. Maybe I was being a bit paranoid, but I thought he might have followed us in. Thankfully, my mom called us over and told us that our room was ready. We left the lobby and went to our room. Shortly afterwards, we left the hotel to go meet family. I forgot about the man for the rest of the day. We returned at about 7, and my mom told us that we could go swimming in the hotel pool. We all went to our room, changed, and went to the pool. A few minutes after we got into the water, the same man from before walked in and sat down. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, so he definitely wasn't going swimming. Again, we didn't think much of it until I could see that my mom was visibly worried. She pointed him out to me, and she said that if he didn't leave within 5 minutes, we needed to go back to our rooms. 5 minutes passed and he was still there, so we got our things and left. By then, it was close to 8 o'clock. We had brought a rented movie to watch, so we planned to watch that and go straight to bed. I noticed that my mom was a little on edge because of the man who had been watching us, and I got a little more worried myself too. Halfway through the movie, my mom got up to get into the shower. While she was in there, someone knocked on the door and said, "Housekeeping." I thought it was weird that the cleaning staff would come this late, but we needed another towel, so I answered the door. I wish I hadn't been so stupid. It was the same creepy man. He gave me a smile and a little wave. I just stood there, kind of motionless. My mind automatically went to the worst possible situation: kidnapping, rape, torture, etc. I heard the water in the shower turn off. He stood there as well for a moment, and then he spoke. "How was your swim?" At that moment, my mom came out of the shower, saw the man at the door, pulled me back, and slammed the door. She locked it. Then she called the front desk from our hotel phone to report the guy. I told her to just call the police, but she didn't listen. She then requested we switch rooms. I then heard footsteps stomping down the hallway away from our room. Thankfully, the guy had left. After that, we switched hotel rooms and didn't see the guy again during our stay. Have you ever gotten an uneasy feeling staying in a hotel room, especially by yourself? Likely not, and I also doubt you've ever been in a hotel room by yourself. But when I was a kid, I always got scared sleeping in hotel rooms. I would always keep looking back at the dark corners of the room every 20 seconds, thinking there would be somebody standing there. My fear not only drove me crazy, it drove my parents crazy, as I would always insist that I would sleep between them until I was around 9 or 10 years old. Anyway, eventually I had to grow up, or at least give off the impression, and started sleeping in my own bed or sharing the bed with my sister. Now I'm 24 years old, living on my own, and have to take a lot of business-related trips for my job. On one particular out-of-town trip, I was staying at a Comfort Inn in North Carolina, with all the expenses paid by my job, of course. I was in the area for a meeting with an office in a different town, and the inn was my home for the night. It was across the street from some big car dealership. That's all I remember about the surroundings. Anyway, I was off the next day, so I could look forward to just relaxing in the hotel and watching a couple movies. I was ironically watching the first Saw movie, and I swear, during the scene where Adam was hearing sounds in his apartment, my childhood paranoia started to come back for a bit, as I thought I heard little crackling type noises coming from inside the closet. Being 24, I told myself that I had to get over this nonsensical childish fear. I simply raised the volume on the movie and tried to ignore it. At the same time, I popped 2 sleeping pills into my mouth so that I'd be wiped out by the time the movie was over. Eventually, I flipped off the TV and rolled over onto my side to finally get some shut-eye. That was when the crackling noises became apparent again. It wasn't constant or anything. It was just like once every minute or so I'd hear this crackling type noise that I just can't describe coming from the closet. It wasn't happening too frequently to really bother me, and the sleeping pills were knocking me out at that point, so I was out within like 10 minutes. The next thing I remember, I woke to the sound of cloth being rustled around. I sprang to an upright position, but it was literally too dark to even see within a few feet in front of me. After I flipped on the bedside light, there I saw somebody dressed in all black with a hood over his head, probably 6'5", 250 pounds, rummaging through my bag. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and in response, he fled the room. He had stolen my wallet and my watch, but he had also created a lasting memory that only digs deeper into a very large childhood fear of mine. I have never heard a story about anything like this on the news or anything, so for something like this to happen to a person like me, somebody who had such an odd, specific fear as a child, was simply catastrophic to me. When I was 17, I started to develop some beef with my dad, who's a huge hothead. Tensions would grow worse through the years, and it got to the point that I would commonly have to leave for the night after getting into huge fights with my dad about personal things that I won't talk about. Sometimes I would stay at a friend's house or check into a hotel. It was May 9th, 2015. I was 21 years old, and after another huge scene back at home with my dad, I had to get out of there for my own good. I checked into a nearby hotel, the Quality Inn and Suites. It was literally half a mile from my house. I'd be throwing away a little less than $100 for it, but I had nowhere else to go. It was early this time around. Usually these outbursts happen around nighttime. It was like 4 o'clock, so I decided to just hang out by the outdoor pool and clear my head. It was funny, I was the only one around in this hotel. The pool was empty, the hallways were empty, even the lobby was empty, except for, of course, the desk worker. Then again, it was only May, and it wasn't like we lived in some huge vacation destination of a town. My room was in the middle of the hall on the 2nd floor. I had no idea why they'd given me that room, since it seemed like I was one of the only few people staying in the hotel. I hung out in my room after the pool for a bit. That's when there was a very light tapping on the door. I waited for someone to yell housekeeping, but they never did. Therefore, I ignored it. And to my surprise, even though I had the do not disturb sign on the door handle, I heard the beep of the lock on the door, and then I heard the door slowly opening. I called out, no thank you, not right now. I couldn't see the employee at the door because there was a wall that blocked the view of the door from the bed. There was a pause, and I repeated myself, growing a bit curious. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. It actually startled me. I got up to actually go follow them and tell them that that was rude. When I stepped into the hall, I looked to my right. Nobody. I looked to my left, and at the end of the hall, I saw the right leg of a woman turning the left corner further down the hall before disappearing. How did she get there so fast, I wondered. I ran down to the end of the hall, and that's when I heard another door closing. When I turned the corner, nobody. Just maybe 20 closed, unoccupied hotel doors. I was so confused and honestly a bit freaked out. I went down to the front desk to complain about the rude employee. The woman at the counter said that must be Rosa. She said she would question her about slamming the door later on. I thanked the woman and then went out to eat at the nearby TGI Fridays down the road. When I got back to the room, I was on the phone talking to my mom, who said that I shouldn't come back because my dad was still super pissed. I entered my room and told her how depressed I was with all this fighting bullshit, and she understood. When I hung up, it was only 8 o'clock. I wanted the night to be over. I brushed my teeth, watched a little TV, and went to sleep at around 9 o'clock. I awoke to a noise. At first, I didn't know what it was. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and listened.
You have to let them in.
There was somebody standing at the left edge of my bed, towering over me. I screamed and felt like throwing up at the same time. It was a dreadful, horrifying feeling. The person then grabbed around my throat and started repeating the words, "You piece of shit." It was an older woman with a weak grip. I was able to escape easily. I ran to the door of the room. I heard her following me, but she stopped at the door when I ran down the halls to the front desk. The woman at the front desk admitted that one of the employees had lost one of her master keys that had access to all of the rooms in the hotel, something they were obligated to report to the head of the hotel. I was furious. Of course, I got a refund, gave some info to the cops, and then went home that night, where my dad actually showed something close to sympathy after I explained what happened. Ever since, I've actually never had to leave the house for the night, and I hope it stays that way. Oh yeah, and I have absolutely no idea whatever became of that crazy nutcase woman that tried to kill me. This happened to my parents back in the late 80s. They were in their mid-20s when this all occurred. My parents decided to go camping in cool California. When they got there, it was kind of late. My mom was sitting down on a log while my dad was unpacking the truck. While sitting down, she heard walking around the campsite, so she went and quietly told my dad she heard something walking around. They got the hell out of there just in case. They drove about 3 miles down the road with their headlights off so they wouldn't be followed. Once they got there, they set up camp and they began to drink their asses off while listening to a boxing match on the radio. Eventually, they settled in for the night. Now, they don't know for sure that this next event is connected to the first, but they believe it is. So they settled in, and my dad was asleep far before my mom. My mom was in the halfway state where you're half awake and half asleep. Suddenly, she heard footsteps outside the tent. She abruptly snapped back to consciousness and listened. She tried waking my dad, but he was way too out of it. She listened for what seemed like hours, when suddenly, she heard the words, "Here I am, I'm going to kill you," from outside the tent. While saying this, the man ran what she believes to be a knife along the tent. She could hear him walking and dragging the knife. She was literally frozen. She couldn't say anything or move. With her mouth agape, she finally snapped out of it and screamed, "Jim, grab the shotgun and kill that son of a bitch." With that, my dad finally awoke. They heard snapping of twigs and footsteps and heard the guy running away. Of course, my parents didn't have a shotgun. It was a bluff that actually worked. My dad got up seconds later and began to run after him, but he was long gone. After that, my parents decided they were getting the fuck out of there before anything else happened. When they got to their truck, they found out that their tires had been slashed. They were in the middle of nowhere and had no way out with some maniac that wanted to kill them nearby. They actually tried blowing up the tires with one of those things you use to blow up rafts. Obviously that didn't work, but they had to try, right? About an hour or so later, a ranger that was patrolling the area came along and helped them out. He brought them back to town so they could get their tires fixed. While talking to the ranger, they found out that he had been searching for any suspicious activity due to recent murders nearby. My parents were likely the murderer's next victims. I tried to find some of the murder cases online, but was unable to. I began babysitting at 13 to earn some extra money to spend horribly on embarrassing things like Fall Out Boy's CDs. I would almost always work for my dad's clients and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl, 9, and a little boy, 7. The parents seemed okay, if a tad crotchety and awkward, giving me a full schedule to follow and jokingly threatening to beat any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to accuse me of knowing a boy, given I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzly hair at that age. Almost immediately after the parents had left, the little girl started singing the words "We're all alone" in a creepy high-pitched voice.
I know, the little boy chimed in. Let's play rape.
Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard the term on TV, knew the word was shocking, and said it just for a reaction. I totally bought into it at the time, sputtering wide-eyed and changing the subject quickly.
These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on the TV because their parents did not seem like the type to allow their precious 7- and 9-year-old to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just go play PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out here."
But I knew exactly where that was headed. I said they could watch any other TV show in the living room while I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Before I even got out the bread, I heard a massive crash. It seemed like the little girl had broken a glass. Tutting and pissed, but ultimately with no way to punish her, I cleaned it up while these two incredibly weird kids watched with wide eyes. Dumping the broken glass into the trash, I went back to making the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so while the kids had chicken, I made a simple salad one for myself. Just as I was finishing, the little boy screamed out in what sounded like an exaggerated scream of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. My ankle, he howled kind of dramatically, flopping back into the couch. By the way he yelled it, I could tell he was a horrible actor. While I tried to figure out how he had allegedly hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. Peripherally, I was aware of this, but didn't really pay it any mind. I was focused on this little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying, I went to stand, but it hurt too much. I don't know. He kept saying this over and over until his eyes suddenly flicked to just behind me where I could see the little girl standing with a perturbing smile on her face. And just like that, he was miraculously healed. At this point, I was just thinking these kids were really weird, craved attention a little too much, and probably needed more parental involvement. Whatever, I was 13 and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two to eat at the dining table. Then I went to get us all soda and returned. After pouring soda for both of them, I realized they hadn't even taken a bite of their sandwiches yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. Then they smiled. For you to take a bite of yours? For some reason, I felt like my heart dropped after she said this, and I'm so glad I had the gut feeling to open the top part of the sandwich, because when I did, I saw glass. Broken glass. Broken glass that I'd put in the trash. I stared in horror at the two kids staring at me with menacing grins. I lost it, shouting at them, explaining they could have easily injured my mouth. What's wrong with you two? Instead of crying or apologizing or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little fuckers began laughing. Not like kids, it was too low. It wasn't that silly, typical kids laugh. It was low and threatening. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was, these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my older sister, cried about what happened, and she came and stayed there with me. We left the house with chills after the parents arrived. I never babysat for those two again. What I can't get past is the level of premeditation that went into sprinkling that broken glass into my sandwich and the totally remorseless way they responded to my getting upset. They were unlike any two kids I've ever met before. This happened 3 years ago, August 2013 at the time I'm writing this. I'm 25 years old, and a few years ago, me and 4 of my buddies who are all the same age as me were on our way to New Hampshire for a vacation, or a 1-week trip rather, to a small getaway home that my buddy Johnny owns. It's in a very rural area, which is ideal for hunting, skiing, off-roading, paintballing, and overall just having a nice rural escape from the city. Why in New Hampshire, you may ask? Well, apparently his grandparents owned the land as their own little vacation spot before they passed, and he didn't want to sell it. This was the first time he'd be going up there for a whole year. We had a late start to the day, so we left Massachusetts around 3 o'clock, and after making a bunch of stops on the way there, we were finally just about there at about 7:30. It was starting to get dark now, and the isolated country roads were a bit spooky at this hour. We pulled onto the property off the dirt road, and Johnny slammed on the brakes and said, "Oh my God." We all looked at the home and saw the front door was open, and Maddie, one of my other buddies, pointed out the flashlight shining around inside the home that we could see through the window. "Dude, we gotta get the fuck out of here," I told him. Johnny did something that surprised all of us next. He stepped on the gas, approached the home, and laid on the horn for a good 10 seconds. The lights coming from inside the home went dark, and there was now nothing but a dark, unlit home with the front door open in front of us. Johnny was like, "Alright, let's go," as he aggressively left the car, ready to confront whoever was in there. We all followed behind. Johnny ran up the front porch, stormed into the home, flashlight in hand, and started yelling like a maniac. My heart was racing as I entered the home. Johnny told Maddie to run down to the basement with him, while me and the two others scouted the main floor. We all used our phones as flashlights. The electricity wasn't turned on yet, of course. Alec checked the kitchen, Amir checked a small bedroom and bathroom, while I checked a master bedroom down by the end of the home. It was seemingly empty, but I was afraid to check any of the closets. I reached out my hand closer to the doorknob of one of the sliding closets, but that's when I heard Maddie and Johnny screaming from the basement. At the same time, the closet door in front of me pulled open with force and somebody emerged quickly, grabbing me and locking me in a hold. Before both of my friends ran downstairs, I got their attention by yelling and they came to my aid. They both pulled the guy off of me and he ran out of the house. We all ran downstairs expecting to find more intruders, but found something much more disturbing. Not only were we greeted to a putrid smell, but we were also immediately greeted to the gruesome sight of two dead bodies, not just clean, unwounded corpses, no. These were bloody, missing limbs, blood was splattered on the concrete floor. It was the most disturbing thing, no doubt, I have ever seen. We all ran as fast as possible out the house in an effort to find the man who attacked me, but it just wasn't possible. Forests surrounded the house, and it would be pointless. The sheriff's department came to investigate. It became a huge scene with police lines, people taking pictures and fingerprints and everything. The two victims were identified as Indian barbershop workers. The cause for the murders is, as far as I know, unknown. I would refer you to Johnny for more information, but I'm not going to invade his privacy and leak his information to strangers like that. When we went home, we didn't speak to each other for about a week. We were all emotionally scarred in a sense, at least for a while. Now, it's nothing more than a story to tell.
So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind, and probably always will. Even makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about early 80s, I believe, she was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So driving into the city, which was about a 2-hour drive from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who then tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small talk. She felt that they were getting along very well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they talked about was money and how he was pretty damn strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way.
As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her one day and maybe catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of having done a good deed. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me this next part. How a week later she got a phone call from the same man she had picked up. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in the car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and even treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. The man's final words on the phone were, "Please, Nikki, please, never ever pick up another hitchhiker." Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so, I've learned one important thing from this story. That I'm going to take that man's advice and never, ever pick up a hitchhiker.
The Wrong Hitchhiker by Nathan Bartholomew. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 in the morning. I was driving down the 542 in New Jersey, a route I commonly took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but woods on either side with the occasional residence. I was on my way back home from town, and as usual at this time of night around our quiet old town, there was not a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road, just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick up his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy, first of all. He seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with the hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" "Just up the road," he said in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I called out the window. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. Jeep Wranglers have very tight seals on the doors, so when he tried to close the door the first time, it didn't shut. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't shut. Just open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are hard to close." The body language he was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, he looked at me, then turned his head slowly to the right, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door and then slamming it back shut. By the way this guy was moving, I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So, how far did you say you're going?" There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied with, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, "You know, I've been wondering for the longest time if it's just worth it to end it all." I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come." He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over next to that sign." I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign, and what followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm next to 3 other scars from previous assumed self-inflicted cuts and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, man. Let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air and backed away slowly from the door. He too left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you by some chance see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them.
Three months after I turned 16 in 2005, I got my first car, a '99 Toyota Camry. On a warm Saturday night, when my friend Alex invited me over to one of his friend's big parties, I knew I wouldn't be in a condition to drive the Camry home afterward. So we carpooled with Alex's girlfriend Brianna. We lived in the countryside of Virginia, meaning less big parties. Meaning when there was a big party, it was a huge deal and everyone would go. We lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from this kid's house. I knew where he lived as I was acquainted with him, but not exactly friends. The whole ride there, we took the same 2-lane highway type road through the woods, and this kid's house was actually on this road further down. At certain points on this road, there were a few houses on either side, and then it would just go back to being a long, empty highway again. The house was tiny, like a lot of houses around the area, but the party was held outside anyways, since his closest neighbors were relatively far away, and noise wasn't an issue. I'll skip most of the party up until the point that Brianna, who was supposed to be our designated driver, had to suddenly leave for a small family emergency. Alex said it was fine and that we'd find a ride home. Well, fast forward another few hours and another few drinks, and I could barely even walk straight. I checked my watch, and it was like 2 in the morning. I figured it was time to go. I started looking for Alex, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it seemed like everybody I knew had already left. I could barely even think straight, but I was still furious at the fact that Alex could have actually left without me. I asked to use the party host's phone and dialed Alex's home number. After 2 tries, I gave up and then realized I shouldn't wake his family up. So, literally not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the road and began walking back home. I knew this walk would take anywhere from half an hour to an hour in my condition. Maybe after 15 minutes of walking down the road, the slight shine of car headlights on the road was fading in from behind me. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and came to a stop right next to me. The man driving the '98 Ford Explorer rolled down the window and asked where you headed. I told him my house was just down the road and beyond a right turn, probably slurring my words beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously hopped into the truck. I was exhausted, and I remember completely disregarding things the guy was asking me because I was so close to just passing out. And that's what happened. The memories of being in that truck turned to a fog as I'm sure I passed out. The next thing I remember, I woke up still in the moving truck. The guy looked at me and laughed, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't familiar. I nervously asked, where are we going? He then said, so what were you doing out this late anyway? As the man answered my very straightforward question with another irrelevant question, the sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out anywhere, I told the man. The man responded with a firm no. I felt like throwing up as he said that. No, I really actually felt like I was going to throw up. I started to gag as I felt more and more nauseous by the second. The man took his eyes off the road to look at me, and that's when I thought of the perfect distraction. I turned in his direction as I continued to gag, and he started to kind of lean away and slow down the car. Thankfully, I drank as much as I did because I finally threw up and made a point of doing it all over the man's lap. The man yelled in frustration and stopped the car, and that's when I took it upon myself to run for my life into the woods and duck behind a few bushes. The man came following into the woods with a flashlight, and on 2 separate occasions, he shined the light straight over me without noticing. Eventually, I heard his footsteps walk even further into the woods past me. That was when I ran back to his truck, but unfortunately, he was smart enough to lock it. By some miracle, I saw another car approaching in the distance, and I ran out into the middle of the street, waving my arms like a lunatic. The car tried to avoid me, but I wouldn't let it. They were forced to stop, and I yelled at them to help me before they came back. Once I told them that I was kidnapped by the man who was driving that Ford Explorer, the driver agreed to give me a lift. Not to the police station or anything, but to my house. I made it back safely, where I couldn't thank the driver enough. I immediately woke up my parents and told them. My dad wanted to know if I got his tag number. And then I felt like punching myself in the face. I failed to get the simplest information from the guy that would have allowed me to actually properly report him. All I knew was that he drove a faded blue '99 Ford Explorer. I made sure to give Alex a piece of my mind, and part of me always held a grudge against him ever since just for abandoning me at a party without telling me. I haven't seen him in 4 years now, however, and this was actually the first time I even thought about this incident for almost a year now. As time goes on, even the worst of memories may start to fade, but after writing this to share with the internet, it's once again fresh in my mind.